For keeping it locked on Wildcats. Arizona has a tough going of it against UCLA. There's a lot of things that we can take away from this game. What does it mean going forward? Let's get started here on Locked On Wildcats.
You are Locked On Wildcats, your daily podcast on the Arizona Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. I am your host, Mike Luke. All right, a lot to get to this show, so why don't we just get started? Arizona goes into Pauley Pavilion, gets off to a really fast start, and then everything kind of hits the fan right there. And by hits the fan, you know what I mean. So let's just basically, all right, Arizona gets off to that fast start. Then UCLA starts chipping ahead, getting into the lead. And then once UCLA got the lead, they essentially never looked back. Arizona got to the point where it was 3, would get it down to 6, and then UCLA would come right back and hit a 3. So, that's kind of where we're at. First of all, certainly wishing the best to Jalen Clark right there on the Achilles injury. Seems like an absolutely fantastic kid and a great player, and we're certainly wishing him nothing but the best. But as far as Arizona goes, this was a mess of a game. First, the one guy that you got to tip your cap to a little bit is Azuolas Tubelis. Been a lot of people that have been on him. A lot of people saying, what the heck's going on with Zoo, this, that, and the other. But you know what? Azuolas Tubelis had answered the call in this game, and he answered the call in a way that he needed to. We'll talk about him a little bit later on in the broadcast, but this was a conglomeration of errors across the board for the University of Arizona. And, honestly, let's just start up front and work our way backwards. Oumar Ballo is terrible. As the season goes on, I think we know this about Oumar Ballo. He's a good college player, no doubt about it, but he is heavy-handed. He moves somewhat, he doesn't move great, to put it mildly. And that's just kind of, that's the way that it is. Against good teams, he can be good. John Schuster put it very well the other day where he said, listen, I'd like to see him just try to dunk the ball on people. And he started to try doing that at the end of the game, but by then it's a little bit too late. He's got tough hands. I mean, his hands are not great. There's really no other way around it. His hands will always be somewhat of an issue. And again, Arizona needed him, quite frankly, to step up and be that guy, because as we've talked about all year, UCLA, one of their few weaknesses is they're not very big up front. And that's been, that's just kind of their MO. So if Arizona was going to win this game, they had to get a big performance out of Zoo, and they just didn't get it. Arizona, I think, Arizona's going to be in good spot going forward, but you needed Azuolas Tubelis to be able to dominate here. And not only did Oumar Ballo, not only did Oumar Ballo not do that, Oumar Ballo, was basically missing in action. There were a lot of guys who were missing in action, but again, we're just kind of starting up front right there. I think with this team, though, if Ballo doesn't dominate against the small teams, you become very vulnerable very, very quickly. And I think that's what the Arizona Wildcats found out right there. You got to get more out of Oumar. Again, not asking him to be DeAndre Ayton, but I'm also asking him to be better than that. Then moving on, Cedric Henderson, not very good today. To put it mildly, Ced struggled. But you also got to remember, we're going to hold Ced to a little bit of a different standard, mainly because Ced Ced was brought in as a grad transfer to be a good rotational player, a good role piece, but he wasn't brought in to be a star. And, and there's nothing wrong with that. So again, going to hold him to a little bit of a different standard, but man, he was tough. It was tough to watch him out there as well. A lot of players really picked a bad night to have their worst games out there, to put it mildly. But, again, Ced has been solid all season. Certainly, overall, big picture, overall, very happy with what he's been able to do. Courtney Ramey. Yes. That was one of the worst performances I've ever seen from a guard. He looked disinterested. He looked like he didn't want to be out there. He looked careless. You name it. Courtney Ramey probably checked off that box in a negative way against Arizona or against UCLA. And we've talked about this pretty much all season. Arizona needs Courtney Ramey to be good. Arizona, because again, he's got more physical talent than Kerr Kriisa. He's got, again, he's a player that we've seen can go for 25 points, can go for 28 points, and he can make it look easy in the process. That's where I think it's a little bit frustrating for Arizona fans because he can be better. He can do that. But again, this was a tough game. And I think what's frustrating about the Ramey performance is that it looked like he just kind of didn't care out there. And that is a big problem because the turnovers, looking away from the ball when it's being tossed to you, just kind of carelessly dribbling it, just basically a lot of different things right there that were very, very disconcerting. I'll put it to you like that. I think that's what was frustrating about everything for the University of Arizona. Now with then Kerr Kriisa, I beat him up a little bit on Twitter. I was probably a little too hard on him, but we also know at this point too that Kerr Kriisa is limited. Again, he's a good assist guy. He's not, and it's certainly not a bad player. Anybody that says he sucks is dumb. But you watch him and you can just tell he's not a great shooter. I think that's fair to say by now. I'm not really pulling any punches right there. Not a great shooter. And not only not a great shooter, he's certainly a guy that defensively is not a great, defensive player. And if you're not going to do that, Arizona's going to need guys to be able to step up and, take that burden. And again, at Arizona, that's just not, we've grown up watching great point guards. We've grown up watching, the Damon Stoudemire's, the Mike Bibby's, the Jason Terry's, the Jason Gardner's, and he's just not in that mix. Now, again, you can certainly win with him, but you got to be able to build around him in a certain manner. And not only do you have to build around him in a certain manner, you have to have certain pieces around him. The margin for error is just not nearly as great against good teams with Kerr out there if he's not playing good ball. And generally against the good teams, he's not stepped his game up. But I also don't write him off. The reason I don't write him off is because he's shown the ability to make big plays down the stretch, and he's shown that time and again. And I think with Arizona, you're just going to try, or with Kerr Kriisa, you're just going to have to kind of take the good with the bad. I would like to see them upgrade that position. I would like to see them get some more talent in there, I guess, to put it mildly. But again, from the starters, this was just a tough performance all the way around. There's really no other way to put it. Sometimes you come in and you're like, well, if you'd done this, there's too much of that to name. And again, I don't want to make it out like Arizona lost by 25 points, but it kind of felt like that because it felt like they just weren't quite on the same playing court or playing. Well, I was almost said playing field. They're not on the same playing field. Now, looking ahead then, well, we're going to look ahead. We'll look ahead tomorrow, though. But let's keep going again on this roster, though, and then we're going to talk about UCLA a little bit. Kylan Boswell was absolutely fantastic. Kylan Boswell was the goods. And you can tell that the more that Boswell plays, the better that he's going to be and the better that this team is going to be. He is so much better than I thought he was going to be this year. And honestly, he was big time. He was big time out there, and he's been big time pretty much all season. What does this mean? I'd like to see, again, he's not going to start this year. Not saying to start him because, again, that doesn't really matter at this point. But I'd like to see him get more minutes for sure. And next year, I need to see him have the ball in his hands. I need him to be the starting point guard. He's got more upside than Kerr. He can just do more things than Kerr. He's better than Kerr. And that's not a slight to Kerr, because you need to remember, though, that Kerr Kriisa has led the conference in assists the last 2 years. And, again, like we talked about, made some timely shots. But when you factor in the defense, when you factor in the shooting, the lack of, just kind of the lack of across the board ability at some points, you're looking at a limited product right there. But again, Kylan Boswell was absolutely great. And I think that's something that we can realistically expect going forward, because again, once the shot starts falling, and you can tell he gets a little bit more pep in his step, and that's where Arizona, I think, becomes a better team, because you've got other players out there, but he's the only one that can really drive the engine in a manner in which he can. So that's the good thing right there. Pelle Larsson, thought Pelle was fine. Wasn't great, but again, Pelle's a role player. Pelle is and there's nothing wrong with that, but again, role players are going to be up and down. Pella's not going to go into a game generally and be able to carry you. And I think going into this year, a lot of people were thinking that, man, Pelle Larsson, maybe he can be that guy to carry Arizona. He's not really built like that. And again, it's not a problem. But if you don't have, but he can play good defense. He can finish around the hoop. He can make he can make some threes, but again, role player. Not so. Arizona's certainly got to get better players in there. Again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more on the next show. But let's talk about Built Bar. All right, now Built Bar. Built Bar is where it's at. You look at the big, strong teams out there in college basketball, and you think to yourself, man, what are they consuming to get so big? Built Bar is probably what they're consuming, because here's the deal. With Built Bar, a lot of people go into a game and they're like, go into a workout and they're like, I got to eat this paste next, or whatever the case may be. There is none of that with Built Bar. And with Built Bar, you think to yourself, man, I don't have to eat that chalky paste. I get to eat something that tastes like a cupcake. That's where you get it. You can get it at all your GNCs. I like the blueberry, but a lot of people like different stuff. Check it out, though. You'll never be disappointed. Built Bar. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to talk about a little bit what UCLA did. Thanks for keeping it locked on Wildcats. I'm your host, Mike Luke. All right, now let's talk a little bit about UCLA. First of all, I'd vote for Jaime Jaquez for Player of the Year in the conference. I don't really subscribe to the best player on the best team. I think that's generally a lazy analysis. And honestly, I think it's a little bit lazy. I think we could do better than that. But, at the end of the day, I think that he's the dog. He's the dude that, you watch him and you're like, all right, man, he gets it. He wants it. And even though he didn't have a great game, he's carried that team. He's been fantastic. He's been fantastic for the Bruins. There's no other way around it. He would get my vote. I don't have a vote. I'm not that cool, but if I did have a vote, I would vote for Jaime Jaquez. Then you got Tiger Campbell. Campbell's one of those guys. I got beat up a little bit on Twitter. I don't care. Tiger Campbell is one of those dudes, though, that you don't really realize how he you don't really realize just how good he is until you see the game, until you watch the game. You can't really tell by the box score. You can't really tell by the, what's going on, from a 30-point perspective, but you can watch him though. And you can tell that, man, he's good, he's good. And, he controls the game in a way that, Arizona kind of had with Mike Bibby. Mike Bibby was, in my opinion, is one of the two best players in basketball at the University of Arizona. And it wasn't necessarily because of all the stats. I mean, granted, his accolades were through the roof, first team All-American, Pac-12 Player of the Year, second pick in the draft. But he was, every single game you went into, he was controlling that game. And Tiger Campbell's got a little bit of that to him, that he can have 14 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and you're like, well, and he still dominated the game. He still controlled the game. It's a special gift that he's got right there for sure. It's definitely a special gift. And I think it's something that, as an Arizona fan, I just kind of tip my cap to, because, we've seen that before. And I think with the Cats, that's something that you'd like to see. I'd like to see a point guard be able to do that for Arizona. Then Jalen Clark, again, wanted to speak on him really quickly. In my opinion, he's one of the 5 best players in the conference. He's been absolutely fantastic for the Bruins this year. Looks like he's probably done with a torn Achilles. That's not been confirmed, although maybe it has been by now. But he had a great, he's had a great season. I don't know what the future is going to hold for him, because he could come back, but the Achilles, that's a tough injury, man, especially this late in the season. Wish him nothing but the best, because, he exemplifies what's good. Most players on UCLA, I can't stand. He's one of the guys. He's one of the good ones. And then on top of that, we talked with Matt Muehlbach yesterday. And Matt Muehlbach said the same thing with, it was an interesting situation for Arizona, because you watch them and you watch this game and you're like, all right, what's going on here Why are you helping off of David Singleton? Because David Singleton is probably the best 3-point shooter in the conference. Not only is he the best 3-point shooter in the conference, he is a guy that, he makes timely threes, and he's done that his whole career. I mean, let's not sit here and pretend that, this is something that should have surprised. And Arizona kept playing off on him, letting him go to the strong side, like Matt Muehlbach said, and do his thing. That can't happen. That can't happen because, again, he's just a shooter. He's only out there for one reason. And not only is he only out there for one reason, but he also thinks that he how do I put this? He is, guys like that, there's really no reason for them to get left open, because at the end of the day, he's a dude that he just shoots. Now, when you got guys that are running off screens, when you got your Salim Stoudemire's, when you've got your, even your JJ Redick's, those are guys that move off screens, can make plays off the bounce, this, that, and the other. There's none of that with David Singleton. So the fact that he kept getting threes and he got like 10 of them, you got to stop that right there. You can't let that occur. You just can't let that occur. But that's kind of where we're at. Now, you look up front then, UCLA, Adem Bona was very, very good for the Bruins. He'd been a good player for them for all season. Curious if he comes back or not. But, between all of them, and then this was just a tough performance for the Cats. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with you. We're going to wrap this one up. Thanks for keeping it locked on, Wildcats. I am your host, Mike Luke. All right, now, all right. All is not lost, though. All is not lost. So, Arizona is the 2nd seed going into the tournament. Right now, I think some people still have Arizona as a 2 seed. Arizona wins the tournament, you're probably going to get a 2 seed out west. So again, you've got a lot to play for. We always used to hear that Lute Olson didn't want to play, in these games, or didn't want to play in the Pac-12 tournament. Totally get that, but this year you've got things to play for. And again, you're going to have, you got that first game Thursday at 6:00. I'll be up there. Then you've got some other games as well. Then hopefully you get a rematch with UCLA. That'd be fun. But again, Arizona is still a good team. Let's not sit here and pretend that they're not. There's just a lot they got to work on. And there's some real limitations involved with this team that, I think Arizona fans just have to live with. But that's where we're at. All right, now we're going to talk about what Arizona needs to do going forward coming up on the next show. But as always, you have a great rest of your Monday. Appreciate all of you out there, and stay there and back the A. We'll be back with you tomorrow You have been listening to the Locked On Wildcats